Hi guys, so this is a dream that I had in the last 6 weeks. So it's Saturday, the 29th of June, 2024 today. So it was between mid-May and, the end of May, end of June 2024. I don't recall the exact date. If I find it, I'll put it in the description box in the future, but it's not too important. Right, I'll crack straight into it. So in this dream was about this dream relates to an earlier dream, a prophetic dream from God I received via the Holy Spirit, where I was shown. She was actually joking. It was really funny. She was joking, kind of kind of laconic, sort of sarcastic, sort of. You can almost see her rolling her eyes. She was joking about the reasons for this. But I'll put the link to that dream in the description box below. That was quite funny. That one. if you watch the full thing. It was, yeah, just the basic message of the dream was that Russian soldiers are tougher and have stronger morale, better morale than American soldiers. Okay, so that was interesting. Bearing in mind that obviously there are going to be, you know, I think on the Axis side there's going to be between 20 to late 40s, could be 40, 45, could be close to 50 countries. And I think on the Axis and on the Allied side, I haven't run the numbers, but at least 30 to sort of 40. We're probably looking at the total number of countries involved in World War III that'll be fighting on one side or the other will be between probably 60 to 90, 60 to 90 countries globally. Could be more. That's sort of a rough range. I'm not 100% sure, but that's kind of what it's looking like. It's going to be a lot, a lot. So a lot of countries will be involved. This is my point. But the two biggest players on either side, obviously, the US on the side of the Allies, and Russia and China on the side of the Axis. So I had lots of dreams about Russia and China because they're at the core of this. I mean, after on the Axis side, I think the next most powerful and important countries in the war will be Iran and North Korea. It'll be those four, and then later Germany and Japan will be important too. Once because they're gonna be forced to switch sides. After they've been conquered. Well, same with some people have been shown that'll be the same with South Korea, but yeah, I would say China and Russia are the most important, and then the next two biggest most important on the Axis side after that will be Russia and Iran and North Korea. But the role of Russia is crucial. Everyone's been shown that in so many dreams, and they're really going to be leading the nuclear thing in many ways. The nuclear strikes around the world when those begin, and Russia's going to come into direct conflict with the US, and then Russia and China along. People have been shown it's between 20 to 40 countries will invade the US, but led by Russia and China. And, so the gist, the core of this conflict is the US versus Russia and China. Yeah. And so that's why this is important. And so there was that previous stream with that piece of information. So that was saying, okay, this is why Russian soldiers are tougher and their morale is higher. So this dream was related directly to that dream, but it was about the why. So this dream gave the why. Why will Russian soldiers be tougher and stronger and have higher morale? Well, this dream didn't necessarily address the bit about higher morale and the kind of nationalism thing. But this dream was addressing why they're tougher and stronger and more resilient. Okay, so this is very interesting. So I'll give the symbolism, and then I'll give the interpretation, and I'll do a discussion. This was, up till now, was kind of introduction lead up. Right, so I'll put a pin to the location on Google Maps of the supermarket I was in the dream. The supermarket will be destroyed quite soon. It's going to be absolutely obliterated. That whole region, Petone, and if you zoom out on Google Maps, if you have a look at the pin, this is where I was in the dream. I think it's interesting for you to be able to go and see the physical location I was in the dream. Kind of gives you context. It's in a suburb called Petone, at the lower on the edge of Wellington Harbour, on the edge of the northern edge of Wellington Harbour, and Lower Hutt. And Lower Hutt's a big flat valley. Well, pretty soon that's going to be under 15 meters of water, and the sea is going to come about and the Americans call it the ocean. New Zealand, we just call it the sea. The sea will come in and land at least. I was looked at least about 2 kilometers, about at least a mile inland, and everything's just going to be obliterated. And it's going to look like Banda Aceh, the capital of the Indonesian province of Aceh, in the northwest of Sumatra after the 2004, I think, Indian Ocean tsunami. And that got hit by tsunamis of a similar height. It's just going to look like a pile of matchsticks and rubble. So that supermarket's going to get smashed. Incidentally, I actually went to school with a guy. There's a guy in my year at primary school whose dad owns that supermarket, and now he works there. And they're well off would be a euphemism. They're absolutely freaking loaded. That place makes a lot of money. So he's gone to the family business now. So whatever, good for him. No need for hate or jealousy. But so I was walking around the supermarket, an aisle of this supermarket in this dream, Pak'n Save Petone. And it was weird because I was walking down an aisle of the supermarket with 2 or 3 friends from New Zealand. I was the age I am now in the dream. So I'm 36. And my friends were a similar age. And then I saw 3 young American guys, kind of similar age. Some of them were a little younger. Well, one was around my age. He'd be like about 35 or 36. 2 were a bit younger. They would be more early 30s. One of them was a specific American guy who I became friends with. Really nice guy. I found most of the Americans I met in Ecuador really nice. And yeah, I met him in this town called Ayampe. I won't say too much more because I don't want to give away the identity of who this person was. But he was a really nice dude. He was more liberal American, kind of Democrat. So it wasn't so open to the idea of these prophetic dreams when I shared them with him. But he was a really, just a really good dude. The friendship just ended organically at a certain point, but it ended on really good terms. I remember the last conversation I had with him was really nice, and I could just feel we were just sort of saying goodbye. Some friendships are just for a season, but it's interesting to note he works in quite a well-paid job, and he doesn't spend. He works some time in the US, and then he comes down and lives in Ecuador for part of the year. Him and his partner, and so they live quite comfortably. Sort of one of the things I got from them, like the kind of the overall vibe was sort of bougie, like bourgeois, upper middle class, very comfortable upper middle class, and not in a bad way. I mean, these were lovely. These were really kind, good people who. It's not like they were rich, arrogant pricks or anything. There was really sweet, good people, and yeah, and I met some of their friends, and their friends were like their local. They had American friends who lived in that area, and their friends were really nice too. The nicest people. They just offered. I remember one of them offered to help me out when I couldn't get money out. Something went wrong. I just saw him on the beach and was walking his dog. He's like, "Oh, hey man, we'll just if it happens again, just let me know." So, just good people, right? But coming from quite an easy, comfortable background in socioeconomic terms. And okay, so I haven't had it easy socioeconomically for the past 10 years. But growing up, I did. Our family was upper middle class. I come from the suburb of Eastbourne, which is, everyone knows in Wellington, it's a good suburb. Like it's always been a nice area. In recent years, as New Zealand society has degraded, people have become a bit snobby and kind of. Actually, I only just become aware of this and conscious of this in the last month or two. I only really truly saw the dark side of Eastbourne that other people had always talked about and I'd heard about. Like I'd heard other people in Lower Hutt, they'd sort of roll their eyes and talk about, arrogant snobs in Eastbourne. I never really got it until I experienced it. Now, after you experienced it, it's difficult it's difficult to see it the same way ever again, to be honest. I mean, there's still a lot of nice people, but there's a lot of rich, snobby, just cold lizard-like people who are very judgmental and elitist and not very nice. They've got more money than they do love and kindness. They're basically their socioeconomic status and their level of wealth exceeds their level of morality and spiritual development. And this is often what happens. This is why often you see when people who come from rough backgrounds where they don't have very good values, when they get a lot of money, they just turn into complete monsters or assholes. Yeah. Anyway, so Eastbourne's kind of see Eastbourne differently now, but it's important the fact that like it was me and some the Kiwi friends I was with were from Eastbourne. The American two or three Americans were sort of people I'd known from South America, and they're upper middle class from wealthier backgrounds, and this is important. So, but then I saw 3 Russian soldiers there. We were just going down the aisles of the supermarket, and we went near it's one of these supermarkets where they have. It's called Pak'n Save. I don't know. I think they have similar things in the US. Like, so you pack your own groceries, and it's like, they'll just have on shelves. They'll just have cardboard boxes cut open to save costs, and it's like it's a cheaper supermarket, but they have lots of things in bulk. And I think it was by the area where there's ice creams and frozen goods, and then in this part of the supermarket, there's like towering shelves with all the stock, but then there's boxes and boxes piled on top of the shelves. So it's like 6 to 10 meters high or something absurd like that, which is like 18 to 30 feet, or it's just ridiculous. It's one of these big bulk supermarkets, and in this aisle, I'm between this tower of goods and the frozen section, which was maybe about a meter, 1.3 meters high. That's about 4 feet high. I saw these 3 Russian guys, full WTF, these 3 Russian soldiers in clearly Russian military uniform with the balaclavas, the kind of distinctive dark green uniform, distinctively Russian military helmets, and the AK. I forget what the current main standard issue rifle for Russian infantry is. It's AK something. Anyway, they had those, and but they looked tough and battle worn and hardened. They were hard men. But they were our age. So they were the same age as the 3 Americans and the 3 Kiwis. And I was kind of thinking about it in the dream, and then I got part of the intuitive download as to what it meant in the dream, and then the rest I got when I was meditating on it in the next few days. So, that was just the scene, right? But I was like, what does this mean? In the dream, and I got part of it in the dream, part of it when I woke up. Okay, so I've given you the dream. Interpretation. Right, what does it mean? Perestroika. So I had my best friend was a Russian. I mentioned this I think I mentioned this in the video I just posted about officially declaring my political position, both personal and for the channel, on this conflict in World War III and which side I'm taking. But my best friend in this life was this beautiful guy, human. I'm not gay. I'm just saying he was just a beautiful soul. Both straight as a ruler. He found a lot of the LGBTQ stuff really hard to deal with. Because there's none of that in Russia at all. I just kind of keep my mouth shut when he would sort of get bring it up, but that was a bit too much for him, and he really he helped me in the early stages to understand what the Babylonian kind of how sick the West has become. He would tell me, for example, about how when he first came, how all the guys jack off to porn in New Zealand, and how there's porn everywhere and sexualized images everywhere, and he said in Russia it's not like that, and he said and it affects you after a while, and then it's hard not to be affected by it. And it was sad too, because he says his he's got to his mum. His parents split up when he was like 4 or 5, which is common in the Slavic countries. Often, sadly, it's, I think, a lot of, just being real, a lot of the men, there's a lot of alcoholism, and often the marriages will break up for that reason. So Sasha, my friend, didn't grow up. He grew up without a dad for the most part, which was very tough for him. But his mother remarried an English guy, and then they moved to the UK. So he's got 2 half sisters. And then he was saying how he noticed in the UK when they moved there, the UK is the same. It's this Babylonian, like soaked with sex, just lust and porn, and it's considered normal to just jack off, like to be a wanker basically. And it's considered normal to watch the most extreme porn. You just go home and look at that. That's considered normal now. In Russia, that's there, but it's not considered normal. They're still promoting the family and traditional values. Like, I knew this guy really well. He'd lived it. He'd lived in New Zealand. He'd lived in the UK. He'd lived in Russia, and he said you could really feel and see the difference. And yeah, so he first helped me to kind of wake up to that stuff. And it was sad because he was saying he saw his little half sisters growing up in the UK, and they were really affected by all the sexual stuff, and it kind of messes up their mind. Children being hypersexualized and being influenced by a hypersexual society from a young age. I mean, yeah, Russia's not perfect, but they're more Christian than us. They're protecting their children. Whereas, in the West, we're like, our politicians, everyone wants to sexualize the kids, and we've got basically groomers and pedophiles who want access to them. And it's like, yeah, we've got books about gender identity for kids, and like kids learning about sex, and like when they're 5 years old, when they don't even know what that is. It's just freaking weird by this point. So yeah, and as I've talked about in other videos, it's like, yeah, Russia's not perfect, but at least Russia cares about their own people. You can see that. Like in the West, our leaders don't even Russia might treat other countries badly, but at least they care about their own people, and Putin cares about his own people. In the West, our leaders we don't care about other countries, but our leaders don't even care about our own people. It's just that they've got no moral values at all. They're completely morally bankrupt. So, yeah, anyway, Sasha had talked to me about during the course of our friendship, about how tough things were in the early 90s in Russia. And, a lot of people died. I don't know how many it was. I think it's been estimated that it was, like a few million. When the USSR broke up, they went basically, to cut to the chase, there was an economic collapse, and times were really, really hard. Like it was really, really tough. And, there was like rations and really quite extreme poverty. So a lot of the young men today in Russia were young children at that time, or, they were born just after that period was ending, when things still weren't great in the late 90s in Russia. They only really started picking up in the last decade or two. So these people, and if they didn't go through it themselves, their parents did and their peers did. So within very recent collective the very recent collective memory of the society, and potentially within the memory of these soldiers, Russian soldiers themselves, because they were children or teenagers growing up during this period, was a period of immense suffering and hardship in Russia. Well, look at the US at that time, or the rest of the Western world. I mean, we were absolutely booming in the 90s. And we haven't been through a period comparable to that since the Great Depression in the 1930s, but that was 90 years ago. That was 95 years ago now. It began, I think, 1929, and we're in 2024, so that's 71 plus 24, about almost 100 years ago. There's almost no one left in our countries who went through that. And as the collective memory of that experience dies with the people who went through it, a lot of the lessons are lost. Like my grandparents on my mother's side, they went through the Depression, and I always noticed growing up, they lived in a town called Levin on the southwest part of New Zealand's North Island, about 90 kilometres north of Wellington. They always had a big vegetable garden in the bottom of their garden. They never trusted the banks because they remembered what happened in the Depression. Well, not like everyone in New Zealand most people in New Zealand are oblivious now and just trust the banks completely, despite them being very corrupt. And there's lots of scandals still about that. But those lessons have been lost, and most people in New Zealand aren't self-sufficient. I mean, basically, they were preppers in a sense. I mean, they had all this. My grandparents were preppers because they remembered how hard times got, and they didn't need to be preppers. This is in like I'm talking about when I was a kid in the 90s, when our society was booming, but they still had a big vegetable pit garden where they were growing lots of their own food. Well, that's because they still remembered the trauma of the Depression from when they were kids. My grandfather did, my mother's father. So this is why the Russian soldiers will be tougher and stronger. This is what the Holy Spirit was showing me, and this was explained to me partly in the dream, and I said partly when I woke up. That's the meaning of the dream. So, and the supermarket represents abundance, and capitalist prosperity. So that that's good. I mean, you enjoy it. It's that saying, but the flip side of it is that if you flip it and use it in the right way, adversity becomes a good thing. It's really just life is. I had a dream where God literally, the Holy Spirit basically told me this. Not a message from God via the Holy Spirit. It basically just straight up say, it's mostly life is mostly. It's a cliche, but it's true. Life is mostly what you make of it. It's about 5 or 10% what happens to you, and 90 to 95% what you make of it. How you deal with it, your attitude, how you frame it. And so it's a really good mindset to have, because there's always life is like the seasons. There's always an autumn, a decline, and then there are hard winters where you lose everything and everything collapses and withers. But then that's just making way for a new cycle, and then spring comes, and then there's growth and renewal, and then you get a boom, and you get the beautiful summer. But it just goes up and down like a sine curve, and it just goes in. It's cycles of life. This happens collectively and individually, and if you can be great. Oh, a friend of mine had a good quote about this, which is that if you can be grateful and have appreciation, you can live in an eternal golden age. You can be in an eternal summer, which is a beautiful insight throughout every cycle. And you can, like, every cycle is summer if you're enlightened, basically, or have more enlightened consciousness. So you have the right mindset. And yeah, so the flip side of the adversity that the Russians went through in the early 90s, it was super tough, but there's that saying, bad times make strong men create good times, good times create weak men create hard times. And then it just goes around and around. And then a friend of mine recently pointed out to me, American friend, there's something called the Tytler cycle, and it's something like from faith to, I'll find it, but it's like from bondage and tyranny to courage, from courage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to abundance, from abundance to apathy, from apathy to selfishness, from selfishness to tyranny, and then from tyranny to bondage again. So it's basically that good times create weak men create hard times create strong men create good times. It's that extended out. So Russia went through hard times in the 90s, and so it really hardened them as a people, and that's one of the reasons they're going to be stronger, and their men are stronger and tougher. It's not that like they're inherently like that. It's partly to do with their history. It's just that like if I think that the men in the Anglo-Saxon countries, I think definitely were much more moral, strong, and tough. The generation that fought in World War II, and that was partly because they'd been through the Great Depression, a lot of them. Yeah. So it's not necessarily that, it's not saying that Russian men are inherently tougher and stronger than Anglo-Saxon men. It's more just to do about the different points we're at in these cycles of our history. And Russia is emerging from a hard, long winter, and hard times create strong men, whereas we're still coming out of, good times create weak men, and not to point fingers at any individuals, but it's self-evident if you see the Anglo-Saxon societies. We're just so decadent and hedonistic right now, and and we're on top of the totem pole globally, right? The West is the dominant power globally. So if you're lower on the totem pole, someone else is always keeping you in check and smashing you on the head and crushing you and exploiting you and trying to invade you or spying on you. But who's keeping us in check? Well, the answer is no one, unless we do it ourselves. And this is why, like, partly you see our societies collapsing into, this just the crime in all of our countries. I'm talking about the Anglo-Saxon ones: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, US. Crime is exploding. Morals are going out the window. It's just, like Last Days of Rome. I mean, like, I could do another video on that, but everyone knows the stuff. It's the end of empire. This is just what we're seeing unfolding, and it's partly because, yeah, it's just we, Russia's empire is ascending as ours falls, and yeah, the experience of our people in the last 4 decades, in terms of the socioeconomic countries in those five Anglo-Saxon countries versus Russia, has been very different. They went through a really hard, tough period similar to the Great Depression, whereas we've been booming for the last 40 years. It's only starting to get tough now, and that's hard on them as a people. So of course they're going to be better soldiers. I mean, literally, a lot of people in our countries will get angry and upset if they, quote, feel uncomfortable. We're so spoilt in comparison. It's really shocking. It's almost a joke. And don't like, yeah. And that transfers on through to the moral and the spiritual thing. Like, they're ready to die for their country, and they've got strong spiritual faith, and they're more religious because I mean, when you get really rich and think everything's so abundant, you can kind of, a lot of countries, they just throw religion out the window because it's like, well, we don't need this anymore. We don't need God. We've got money. But hard times bring people closer to God, because that's one of, like, it's that saying, there are no atheists in a foxhole. It's like, yeah, people get desperate, and they start searching for answers. So yeah, it's certainly influenced the spiritual and moral aspect too of it will have indirectly affected the fact that Russian soldiers have higher morale. These things that they went through, but the dream was primarily talking about and showing me that it's I think Perestroika, it's what it's called, the economic collapse that Russia went through following the dissolution of their empire, the USSR, in the early 90s. And I mean, Russia's still an empire now, but it, like, as it is in its current form, but it shrunk a lot. And yeah, so that's the why of why Russian soldiers will be tougher and stronger going into this war. Yeah, I hope that's been of some value. If you have not done so, please refer to the disclaimer in the description box below. Thanks.